Elon Musk is here. He is chief executive of two startup companies with bold missions. He leads Tesla Motors, the electric car company that has attracted attention from both car enthusiasts and environmentalists as well. The company's powerful Roadster, which can travel from 0 to 60 in less than 4 seconds, is entirely powered by batteries. The company plans to break into the mainstream auto market with an electric sedan as early as 2011. Musk is also founder and CEO of Space Exploration Technologies, a company trying to slash the cost of space travel. Last year, the company signed an agreement with NASA to send cargo to the International Space Station. And if that is not enough, he's also chairman of a growing company called Solar City that installs solar panels on homes and businesses. He has thrived in Silicon Valley, one of the co-founders of PayPal, the online payments company that eBay bought for $1.5 billion in 2002. I am pleased to have him here at this table for the first time. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I've been a big fan of the show for a long time.
Let's just talk about you first, so that if the audience does not know, growing up in South Africa.
Yeah.
And how did you end up in Canada?
I guess growing up in South Africa, it was very technology oriented, and I taught myself how to program computers, mostly because I wanted to program games. Right. And when I was about 12, I sold my first game, and whenever I'd read about technology and great innovation, it was coming from the United States, and so it was that's where I wanted to be. And I tried to convince my parents to move there, and neither of them would. They were divorced. I tried my mother. I tried my father. Neither would do it. My mother later moved back to initially Canada and then the U.S. And so when I was 17, as soon as I got my Canadian passport, 3 weeks later I was in Canada.
So here you are, and you come to Canada and make it to the United States, and then you and several other guys come together and create PayPal. Right. And you sell it to eBay for whatever it was, $5 billion. Yeah.
So after PayPal, that gave me a fair bit of capital, and there were 3 areas. When I was in college, there were 3 areas that I thought would most affect the future of humanity. And those were the internet, the transition to a sustainable energy and transportation sector, and the third was space exploration, in particular the extension of life to multiple planets. Now, I didn't ever expect to be involved in the third one, but that seemed to me that's something that would be very important for the future. And with the capital that I got from the sale of PayPal, I was able to go into both those areas. And so hence SpaceX and in the space, and then in the sustainable energy and transportation, you've got Solar City and Tesla.
Let me talk about space exploration just for a moment. How is it going in terms of creating the systems that will engage us in space exploration, not just for governments and not just for NASA, but for private citizens as well?
Well, you have to divide the efforts that are going on into what is an orbit class effort versus a suborbital class effort, and there's really a very big difference. But the general public doesn't understand the difference between getting to space and getting to orbit, and so it's important to make that distinction. To do a suborbital flight, you need a terminal velocity of around Mach 3. Right. To get to orbit, you need a terminal velocity of Mach 25. It's a huge difference, and because the energy required to do that scales with the square of the velocity. So suborbital might be 9 units of energy. Orbit is 625 units of energy. So it's only about 1.5% of the energy of orbit is required to get to suborbit. So there are a number of efforts in the suborbital category that certainly could grow one day to orbital. There's Jeff Bezos has an effort. And I know that's something that's pretty important.
Is Branson involved in this or not?
Branson, absolutely. Right. Not so much directly from the technology standpoint, but from he's funding that development at scaled composites in California.
And what are you doing?
So we're in the orbit class, and that's it's a lot more capital, and that's really where you're sort of pushing the ragged edge of what's physically possible. And last year we got to orbit for the first time with our rocket, and that was certainly a huge relief and a milestone.
Yeah, and so what's the next step? You get a rocket into orbit.
Yeah. So next month we were putting a satellite for Malaysia into orbit, and then
from Malaysia.
For Malaysia.
Oh, for Malaysia.
Yeah, right. So the Malaysian satellite. But in the rocket business, the rocket company does the launch. It's not like the airline business. So you don't sell the rocket, you sell the launch.
Right.
And then later this year, we'll be launching our big rocket from Cape Canaveral. That's the Falcon 9, and that's the one that's going to be servicing the space station, among other things.
Is there a philosophy here that somehow the private sector can do a lot more than it has done in areas that seem, because of the size, reserved for government?
Yeah, definitely. The private sector is very good at optimization and innovation. I mean, the private sector is generally better at doing things than the government. I think that's fair to say. But there are certain things that the government that are suited to the government, like basic research and that sort of thing. Yeah. So as far as SpaceX, the reason that there hasn't been a huge number of a big improvement in the space industry, I think, is because of it's very difficult for Schumpeter's creative destruction process to come into effect, because it is such a significant amount of capital that's needed to start a rocket company, and it's a very difficult technical challenge. And the number of people that really understand rocketry in the world is a very small number. So it's really a huge barriers to entry. And that's why we haven't seen the forcing function of improvement that there should have been over the years.
And your understanding came from this was not what you studied in college.
Well, I studied physics.
But studying physics and studying rocket science
right.
is a very different thing.
Yeah, no, it gives you the basics. It gives you the basics, good framework, good analytical framework.
Yeah.
But no, I picked it up along the way. But
what is your core competence, you think?
I think it's
technology.
Technology, yeah. Technology. If something has to be designed and invented, and you have to figure out how to ensure that the value of the thing you create is greater than the cost of the inputs, then that's probably my core skill.
Now bring me to the car, and I drove a car this afternoon.
So far, so good.
Which was terrific. It's the Roadster.
Yeah.
Where does that stand? You obviously, I've been in the Google parking lot.
Yeah. Okay. You've seen a few there.
I've seen a few there.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's true in other places in Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it's particularly a car that appeals to people in Silicon Valley because of interest in technology and high performance and lots of other things, or what? Whether there are a lot of rich people who are willing to spend that kind of money for something they think is on the cutting edge of causes they believe in, sustainable energy.
Right.
But tell me about where you are in this development of this electric car, which has, most of all, this extraordinary sort of power.
Yeah. 0 to 60 time at 3.9 seconds, and the road.
This is extraordinary when you think about the sports cars and anything else that's out on the road today. Yeah,
in fact, on the Top Gear test track, our standard Roadster beats a Porsche GT3.
Exactly,
which
that's
is
my point.
Not
that's
bad.
A reference.
and the Roadster Sport will do even better.
Yeah. But you've also said, in terms of where you want to go, that developing a high-performance sports car is not what this is about.
Absolutely.
This is about something else, and you want to develop a sedan.
Yeah, the whole purpose behind Tesla, the reason I put so much of my time and money into helping create the business is we want to serve as a catalyst for accelerating the electric car revolution. The price of gas at the pump does not reflect the true cost of gasoline, because you have a consumption of a public good. It's one of the most. It's really a common problem in economics. You have the same thing in fishing, where because there's no cost to fishing stocks, people just overfish and you have disaster that ensues. Right. And here we're not paying for the cost of the CO2 concentration in the oceans and atmospheres. We're not paying for all the ancillary effects of the wars and all the other things at the gas pump. So you effectively have a subsidy taking place at the gas pump because of that. So the only way to bridge that is with innovation, is to try to make electric cars better sooner than they would otherwise be.
Now, suppose this is a hypothetical which may or may not speak to the point, but suppose 15 years ago,
right?
Let's say Bill Clinton as president, who talked about the road to the 21st century and all of that. Suppose he had said, I believe so much in sustainable energy that I want to make a commitment, and the federal government, using all of its resources, will develop an electric car with appropriate battery power that will change the face of the automobile industry in the world. Was that very doable? Now, Bill Clinton was elected in 1992, 17 years ago.
Yeah. You could have made a reasonably good electric car around that time for a lot of investment.
And should that have been done? Should the U.S. government have made that kind of... Otherwise, you will not be able to change the driving habits of Americans. Was it a worthwhile expenditure at that time?
I think it probably would have been a worthwhile expenditure, but the thing that really helps electric cars is lithium-ion.
Right. And when did that come around? I mean, explain why batteries has always been the great dilemma for developing an electric car.
Sure. Well, the energy contained within a battery is so much less than is contained in gasoline that, I mean, it's really it's hard to quite describe. Another way to put it is the Tesla battery pack in the Roadster, which is the most advanced battery pack in the world.
Right.
The common reference is to call what is actually a cell a battery.
Right.
So a cell is the little single can of chemicals, and then if you have multiple cells, that's what actually a battery.
Right.
That's literally what a battery means.
Right. Multiple cells.
The multiple cells.
Right.
And usually, as the batteries get bigger and bigger, they get harder and harder to deal with. So the cell that we use is a commodity cell.
Right. It's buy it anywhere.
Pretty much, and it's the same sort of thing that's in any number of laptops.
Right.
The challenge is combining those cells and having thousands of them, making sure they're safe, making sure they'll last for 200,000 miles or 100,000, over bumps and potholes and extremes of temperature, and safe in a crash, and that compounds the problem massively. And you've got to make sure the charges and temperatures balanced across the whole thing. So the difficulty is really at the pack level much more than it is at the cell level. And that's really where the single biggest area of Tesla's expertise. Although I should point out that Tesla also has, we designed and built the motor and the power electronics and the software that manages the whole thing. So those are important too. But the battery is the single most important thing. And the Tesla battery pack, to reference it to gasoline, it weighs about 1,000 pounds. And it has the energy content of 2.5 gallons of gasoline. So that
means you've got to have a lot of charges.
Well, what that means is that, but there's an advantage because the consumption of that energy is much more efficient in an electric car, and this is I'll get to why is the Tesla Roadster twice as efficient as a Toyota Prius, which is obviously not a sports car,
right?
And the reason is because an electric motor is fundamentally super efficient at turning energy into motion. So a good electric motor, such as the one that we have in the Tesla Roadster, is about 90% efficient at turning the electricity into motion, whereas a gasoline internal combustion engine is somewhere typically in the range of around 17 or 18%. Most of what it does is generate heat. So even though it's only 2.5 gallons of gasoline, that 2.5 gallons of energy content goes really far compared with if you had if that was
okay compared to the Prius, but also compared to the new GM Volt.
Right.
How does it do in comparison with the Volt?
The Volt is a different architecture. It uses it's a plug-in hybrid architecture. So it's I think got about a 40-mile or so battery pack.
That's what they say, right?
And then there's an engine with a generator that allows you to go beyond the 40 miles.
Exactly.
Right. And whereas ours is pure electric. And the strategy that we've decided to hew to is a pure electric strategy. I mean, I've been criticized sometimes for responding to questions like yours to explain why we've gone pure electric, and then people have taken that to be an attack on the Volt, which is not the case. I hope the Volt succeeds, and I think it can be a pretty good car and all that kind of thing.
I don't take this as an attack. I'm asking questions.
It's not, but I just wanted to put that.
What I hope to do in this conversation with you is figure out what it is you've done, because you've got a fair amount of attention.
Sure.
Figure out why you're not further along than you are, or figure out why you are and what your expectations are to do. And where is the game for you?
I think it's taken a while for the industry to come around to this point, but I think it's largely at this point it's almost become conventional wisdom that the future is electric cars. Right. The only question is this interim period of this transitional period. But if you look at the pace of battery improvement, it's clear that's why I mean it's inevitable.
Right.
The future will be entirely electric.
And the irony of all this conversation is that in the last year, a year before its bankruptcy, General Motors had announced that the Bolt, was the key to their future as an automobile company.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I mean, one area of criticism I think that is valid regarding GM is
Prius
that
helped them come to that conclusion, by the way.
Well, they should have probably done a Prius or something like that. But I think if they had the EV1,
right, exactly, which didn't work, but didn't make it for reasons I'm not clear.
Right, and
as a marketing success.
Yeah, and Chris Payne did a movie, Who Killed the Electric Car, about it, and I was sort of trying to investigate that issue. But I think it's notable that in that movie it shows that the customers who had the EV1, the cars had to be taken away from them and crushed, and they held a candlelit vigil.
Right.
If you have people that really love a product to the degree that they're willing to hold a candlelit vigil for it, that says, hey, maybe you should make an EV too.
It certainly does say that, So the car that I drove today, the Roadster 2, I think it was a Roadster before this. This is right, second iteration of it.
Yeah.
Came through production what year?
The first Roadster #1, the first production Roadster, which was fully Department of Transport legal and all that sort of stuff.
Met all the standards.
Yeah, it was February of last year, and that was my car.
That was the car, your car?
Yeah.
Meaning what? The one
production
that you drive?
Unit 1.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so then you decided immediately to make improvements on that.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a little rough going in the beginning, and we had some issues with some of the powertrain components.
Right.
In fact, not the hard stuff, but the stuff that's sort of theoretically easier. We were able to fix those and get production ramped up, and now we're at the point where we're delivering about 20 to 25 cars a week.
You know that Tata Motors, obviously
I know Ratan Tata.
Take for a moment what he's doing in India.
Yeah.
Developing a little sedan for $2,300, the Nano.
Right.
Where do you put that in the whole equation of where the future of cars are?
Well, I think it's a good idea to have affordable cars. I think the problem with something like the Nano, which I think, by the way, I would say a problem. I think it's a great idea, and Ratan is a gentleman in the scholar and an awesome guy all around.
All of those I agree with. Yes,
yeah.
It's hard not to.
Yeah, exactly. I think where it's going to become challenging in the future is as the price of gasoline rises. The cost of acquiring the car is a much less of an issue than the cost of operating the car.
Right.
And I think oil is
and
going
it's
to
inevitable
be very,
that it's already
very,
moving back up. And
do
you have some assumptions in your own calculations as to where oil will level off?
I think it will exceed the numbers we've seen last year.
144.
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. I think we'll see it start to approach $200 and beyond
by 2010, 11, 12, somewhere in there.
I'd say whenever the next boom is. So if let's say the next boom is 4 years from now, it'll be around that point.
Of all your businesses, which one do you care the most about?
Well, right now my time is split roughly evenly between Tesla and SpaceX. So I guess it would be pretty even between the two. And Solar City is doing great on its own, and the two co-founders there, Lyndon and Peter Rive, have done a phenomenal job, and thankfully it requires very little of my attention.
Right now, the reason to create a sports car, a Roadster, as the first stage of this, is because it attracts attention, or what?
Oh, so great question. So, because people often misinterpret why we have created a sports car, because they will say, the implication will be
sports cars for rich guys is not a way to solve the energy problem.
Right, exactly. And they would sort of like that I feel that there was somehow a shortage of sports cars for rich guys or something like that, and that was the problem.
That's right.
And not if any new technology is expensive when it starts out. And you can point to pretty much anything, because the first thing that engineers are trying to do is make it work, and then when you make it work, then you optimize and you optimize and you optimize. And if you look at the early days of computers or cell phones or almost anything, even the early days of gasoline cars, they used to be toys for rich people until they were made affordable and mass production.
Henry Ford came along.
Yeah, and then you combine that
he
with
invented the car.
Yeah, and then you combine that with the fact that we're just a little startup. There's just no way that we could afford $1 billion to make a giant car plant that would make hundreds of thousands of cars a year, because that's the kind of volume you have to get to make cheap cars. And it's also the first iteration of the technology. So we had both a volume problem and a new technology problem. And so that naturally, you have to
reach scale.
You have to reach scale, and you have to work the bugs out of the system, and so you got to make it, and you want to make your mistakes at a small scale.
Okay, so how's that going? Reaching scale and being able to create a business plan that will enable you to reach a large audience, and create and continue the development of the technology that will make it even more attractive.
It's going really well, actually. So we had a few bumpy years in the beginning, but at this point we're producing at a steady state of about an annualized production rate of about 1,000 roadster sports cars a year. We unveiled our sedan a few months ago, which is a much more functional car, and it's a $50,000 car. So it's about half the price of the Roadster.
And the production run, say, for the year 2010 for the Roadster will be?
About 1,000.
And for the sedan?
The sedan is only coming out in 2 years.
So in 2011 will be the first year.
Right.
And what's the projection for that?
We're expecting to do 20,000 units a year for the sedan. It's always difficult to predict these things exactly, but our target is we'll produce a total of about 100,000 of them and about 20,000 a year, and there are going to be many variations on that. We'll do an SUV, and we'll do other things, and then we'll do our third generation platform beyond the sedan. The Model S sedan will be a sub $30,000 car. So we're trying to get to mass production as soon as we possibly can, but that's both from the cars that we make ourselves, as well as the cars we do in partnership with others, like the Daimler deal you may have read about.
Right.
And, yeah.
So how do you measure the odds of success?
Personally, I would say success for me, for Tesla, is that we've accelerated the advent of electric cars by at least 5 years. But is that
the goal, to accelerate the advent of electric cars, or to create a great electric car company?
I think the two are synonymous.
Okay.
I mean, you do one, you do the other.
Okay.
Yeah.
And why is it that it's happening by a guy who created a startup in 2003 rather than a whole range of sort of industrial automobile companies around the world, not just here? Fiat is a successful car company, and they own Chrysler.
Right. Well, disruptive technology, like where you really have a big technology discontinuity, it tends to come from new companies.
Right.
You could ask the same question of why did Google come from Larry and Sergey?
Right.
Who, by the way, I've known Larry since before he got venture funding for Google.
Ned, is he an investor in Tesla?
He is. Larry and Sergey are investors in Tesla.
And they drive them or don't drive them?
Yeah, they drive them, absolutely.
Because some of the criticism that comes at you and the company now is that you went out to seek a lot of external financing and did not reach your goals.
Well, it's taking us longer to reach our goals, but we're definitely reaching our goals.
Yeah. What was it? Raise $100 million, to raise 40, or what was it? What was the goal?
Well, I think some of the stumbles were silly mistakes we made ourselves. Some of them were market externalities. And we were getting ready to raise, or we were in the process of raising about a $100 million round that began in sort of the summer of last year, and then ran into, Force 5 hurricane.
Right, exactly. An economic circumstance that took everything in sight.
Yeah. And so that forced us to scale back our plans a little bit. We had to do a layoff. And we had to raise the money internally from existing investors. I had to put up a lot of the money personally, because there was just no money. And so that was sort of a hair-raising time for the company. But at this point, we're actually in good shape. We expect to be profitable in the third quarter.
And that comes from the success of the Roadster.
Yeah, and the Roadster. And we also have a powertrain supply business to Daimler as well for an electric smart that we're doing with them.
Make the smart car an electric car.
Yeah, the smart car was always intended to be an electric car, but they could never get the battery right. So a year and a half ago, we met with Daimler, and I was trying to convince them to work with us. We've really tried hard to work with a lot of different car companies, and
what happened?
Well, I guess they think, they sort of took the attitude of what does some little startup in Silicon Valley know that we don't know or couldn't do,
and what would you say to them?
Well, we'd say drive our car and look at our technology, and I don't know, it just never seemed to sort of sink in. But Daimler did, actually. So I went through Stuttgart one day on the way to India, actually, and met with Dr. Weber, the head of global R&D, and we had a conversation. I said, well, what does it take for us to work together? We'd love to do something. We'd love to do something with an affordable mass market car that we ourselves couldn't do right now because we don't have the capital and resources.
Most of it.
Yeah, and so I said, well, what about an electric Smart? And because the Smart was always intended to be an electric car, and what would it take for us to work together? And he said, well, if you could do a prototype, that would really go a long way. So we did. We worked really hard. The powertrain team, led by J.B. Straubel, did an awesome job. And 40 days later, when they came out to visit, we said, here's the car, take a drive. And they really liked what they saw.
And so what did they do then?
Then they said, okay, well, let's take it sort of another step further, and they gave us a little R&D contract, and eventually got to the point where we got a contract for to supply 1,000 cars for them, and then if we do well on that, we'll potentially go into tens of thousands of cars. But this is a car that everyone could afford, and could hopefully come quite soon.
Do you have a profile of the people who you think will want to buy these roadsters?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the kind of person who likes a performance car. Maybe they own a Porsche or a Lamborghini or something.
This car is actually faster than a Lamborghini 0 to 60.
Yeah, it's I think faster than almost
anything I know of. Yeah.
I mean, there's like things. The really sort of $1 million supercars. Obviously, those will beat it. Like the Ferrari Enzo is going to be faster.
Right, exactly.
But it's pretty much faster than any normal sports car. And it's really easy to drive. If you want a high performance car with a clean conscience, this is the only option. And the sedan is going to be for someone that wants a great sedan and also a clean conscience, and it's also going to be cheaper to operate than So.
Right. You are, as you well know, a controversial guy as well.
I try not to be controversial,
I know
but it seems controversy seems to find me.
It finds you. It finds you because you think big. You're a software guy who has been successful in the private sector.
Yeah.
And see no reason you can't do things that other people have not been able to do, no matter how large the corporate enterprise. Create the best electric car, or B, put privately astronauts in space, which you say you will do in 2 years?
Well, yeah. It sort of depends on when NASA asks us to do that. If NASA turns on asks us to do that this year, which we're hopeful that they will, the White House has convene a panel on the future of human spaceflight. That panel is going to make their recommendations in a few months. I hope that some of those recommendations will be favorable to SpaceX, because the alternative is if SpaceX doesn't do it, we will be entirely dependent on the Russians to carry our astronauts to the space station after 2010. And billions of dollars will be spent on essentially a sole source situation to the Russians, which I think is outrageous.
And you haven't taken advantage of the opportunity to go in space yourself, have you?
No, I've not.
Have you wanted to?
If it was purely a matter of personal interest, I would have done it already.
Right.
I mean, I do want it. I do want
it. Is Sergey interested in that, or no?
Sergey is
expressed some interest in that.
Some interest, yes. Yeah, I would like to go at some point, but it's. I'm also in the point where it's difficult for me to take personal risks. I used to take a lot of personal risks
because of children.
I've got my kids and responsibilities with the companies as well, and so if I do things where they have personal risk at this point, I risk more than my own being. Yeah.
You've had how many triplets? You have one set of triplets and one set of twins.
Yeah. They have the twins with me in New York, actually.
So they like the car.
Yeah. They can't drive and they can't go on the roadster because it doesn't. It's not very kid friendly. But the sedan.
No, it's not very kid friendly. You're right.
The sedan will be ideal for them. So.
Much success to you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.